Welcome to the second section of Mijas International on this Monday, the 27th of January. My guest today is author Lorraine Mace, and Lorraine has written 3 crime thriller novels, and these are under the name of Frances de Plino. They're Bad Moon Rising, Someday Never Comes, and Call It Pretending. And they feature Detective Inspector Paolo's story. Bad Moon Rising is a finalist in the People's Book Prize, and the award ceremony is in London in May 2014. And Someday Never Comes has been nominated for the Crime Writers Association Dagger Awards for 2014. That means Lorraine is up against people like Harlan Coben, Kathy Reichs and Lee Child. She's also a humour columnist for Writers Magazine, deputy editor of Words with Jam, which is for writers and publishers. She's also won and been in numerous poetry competitions, including the International Petra Kenny Poetry Competition in the humour verse category. And Lorraine writes fiction for Women's Magazine Market and has a critique and author mentoring service and runs writers' workshops. She's co-written the book ABC Writers Checklist with Maureen Vincent Northam, and this April, the 2nd in fact, her first children's book, Vlad the Inhaler, is released. Gosh, Lorraine, that's more than some people do in their own lifetime. That's amazing.
You actually made me tired, just listening to you.
I was looking at all the things that you're doing, and I'm thinking, goodness me, you must be a really good time organiser.
Actually, I'm not. I'm terrible. But fortunately, my husband is really good, and he does a programme for me each month. At the end of each month, he says, what have you got coming up? And I tell him. He wants the deadlines, etc. And then he comes back with this wonderful programme, so that each morning and afternoon I know exactly what I've got to do.
That's really useful, isn't it?
Without him, I would be in such a mess.
Yeah, because usually people that are creative don't really want to bother about schedules, because their mind is on writing or producing poetry, music, whatever,
yeah.
And don't normally get to grips with timekeeping, do they?
I'm terrible. I am really bad. Without Derek, I would be in such a mess. Really.
Okay, well, it's thanks to Derek then.
Thanks you, Derek.
Thanks to Derek. Now, shall we start with how you became involved in the world of writing in the first place?
Oh, I wrote my first short story when I was 11, and it was published in the school magazine. And I didn't write another thing until I was in my 40s.
Really? Oh.
We've lived all over the world, and I've had quite an interesting life. But when we moved to France, I had nothing to do, and people said to me, you know, you're going to get bored, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to write fiction for the Women's Magazine Market, which is really an arrogant thing to say, because it is an incredibly difficult thing to do. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know that then. But I was fortunate in that I had a story published in That's Life magazine. Mm-hmm. And I thought, right, I'm going to learn how to do this properly. So I took a Writers' Bureau course, which led to lots of other writing opportunities. And I became a columnist and wrote articles and short stories. And then a few years after I'd been a student, they asked me would I be a tutor for them. Mm-hmm. And for 7 years, I was a Writers' Bureau tutor.
Oh, goodness. So helping other people to get into the field
I
of
love
writing.
I love helping other writers.
Yeah. Oh,
really.
That's good. It's good to give something back, isn't
Always,
it?
always.
Now, you do have some wonderful crime thriller novels, and the series is the Detective Inspector Paolo's story. Mm-hmm. But you did write it under a different name, which is Frances de Plino.
Yes.
Now, why was that?
Because I started out as a children's author.
Right.
And the first book that I ever wrote was Vlad the Inhaler. That was the first book I finished. And I thought that that's where I would go. That I would just write children's novels. And then I got the idea for Bad Moon Rising. And I didn't want children to go into a bookshop and say, "Ooh, Mummy, there's a book by Lorraine Mace. I like her." Mm-hmm. Take it home and then discover that it's really not for children.
It's not for children, no.
So when I looked for a pen name, my great-grandfather great-grandfather was Italian.
Ah, right.
So I chose the feminine version of his name.
Yes. So that was the connection
yes.
then? Yes. Okay. Now, you do have the 3 in the series here,
yes.
don't you? First one being Bad Moon Rising.
Rising.
Okay. And the second one obviously was Someday Never Comes. Just to give perhaps a little bit of an idea of the type of crime thriller that they are. Just choose maybe one of them to talk about.
Well, all three are, the crime in each of them is very different, but they would fall under, I suppose, what you would call the hard-boiled category. There's a certain amount of violence, there's a certain amount of, not a huge amount of sex, but there is, you know, a certain amount of sex in there. They're definitely not for people who like cosy crimes.
No. No, I guessed from the front covers.
They do look a bit scary. Actually, the covers are very good.
Yes,
they sort of sum up the stories.
The one that frightened me the most was the one with the doll on the front.
I know.
Yeah.
A lot of people say that doll is actually the doll that belongs to a child who is snatched.
Oh, right. So
it's very apt to be on the
front cover. Oh. And has that child ever been found?
Well, I can't tell you.
Oh, no. No. You can't, can you? No. No, that's very, very true. So, yes, they've got a lot of pace to them, a lot of...
yes.
You know, it's one of those type of books that you want to keep turning the page because you want to know what's happening.
Yes, I have been told, well, the reviews that I've had are that they are page turners. You have to get to the end. You have to find out who the villain is and just hope that Paolo gets there in time.
Yes. Well, good luck with your nominations as well. As we said earlier, Bad Moon Rising, finalist in the People's Book Prize, awards ceremony in London in May, and Someday Never Comes, nominated for the very big one, isn't it? The Crime Writers Association Daggers Awards. I
know. I'm just thrilled to be on the same page as those writers. I don't care if I don't get any further. Just being on the same page as the top crime writers is
I mean,
amazing.
Lee Child, Kathy Wright, Gardner. Yeah.
And one of my all-time favourites, Harlan Coben. I love his books. So, yes.
You'll get to meet them, won't you?
Possibly, if I get any further. We'll just have to see.
Well, you let us know how you've done, and we'll keep everybody up to date.
Thank you.
Now, you do quite a lot of other things. I mean, you're a humour columnist for Writers Magazine.
Yes.
You're the founder, deputy editor of Words with Jam, which is for writers and publishers, helping them along. There's all sorts of things about the publishing industry, writing and reading, that sort of thing. But you are the founder member of Flash 500, which runs 3 fiction categories, is it?
Yes, that's right.
So I'll let you tell us all about that and why you decided to do Flash 500.
Okay. When I was writing a lot of short stories, I used to write quite a bit of flash fiction and to enter into competitions, and the prize money was always rubbish for flash fiction.
Right.
And I thought, I'm going to start a competition for people who like to write flash fiction with really good prize money.
Flash fiction being you write it very quickly, or
no? Oh no! It takes, actually, flash fiction is one of the hardest to write. 500. My competition is for short stories up to 500 words, but they have to be a complete story: beginning, middle, end, good character development, a good plot that keeps you going.
Keeps you interested.
Yes. And the prize money is very good. As you said earlier, I also used to write humour verse. So when Flash 500, the flash fiction, was well established, I thought, well, why not go for another category? So I started the humour verse one, and that's going very well. And then last year, for the first time, I had a novel opening and synopsis category, and that did really well. And it's judged by a publishing house, and the winner last year, their novel is now under consideration by that publishing house.
Oh, that's good, isn't it?
So as well as the prize money, they've actually got their novel in front of somebody who may publish it, which is very difficult.
I was just going to ask you that. Did you find it really difficult to get your books into print in the first place, to get a publisher to look at them? Not so much with the crime novels. I was very lucky with the crime novels. Because I was concentrating on my children's books, although I'd written Bad Moon Rising, I didn't do very much with it. And somebody said, this particular publishing house, Crooked Cat Publishing, looking for new work. And I sent it off and they liked it, and
the rest, as they say, is history.
Okay.
But with the children's book, that was harder. I had an agent, top agent, in the UK. And it was just the wrong time for that particular book, and she couldn't get it.
She couldn't get it in anyway.
No.
Yeah.
And then the beginning of last year, once again, a writing friend said, there's a publishing house in the US, I think Vlad would be perfect.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Sorry, okay.
We'll talk about it in a minute. I just wanted to get back to, you know, you do the humour verse category in Flash 500.
Yes.
And I'm presuming poetry and verse and that sort of thing. There's not as many people that are interested in doing it, so it's a good way to encourage people, isn't it?
It is. You would be surprised how many people write humour verse. And again, like the flash fiction category, it's incredibly difficult, first of all, to get it published, and secondly, to get paid for it. So to be able to enter a competition where, again, the prize money is worthwhile, we get a lot of entries. It's turned out quite well.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. It's good. And that's the Flash 500 that you're also involved with. You write fiction for women's magazine market. Is that something that takes up quite a lot of your time?
I don't do as much as I used to. I've had short stories in my weekly, That's Life, Ireland's Own, The Lady, a number of top weekly magazines in the UK. But now I've run out of time.
Yeah.
And I need an extra day in the week.
Yes, because you'd have to sit down and think, well, what shall I write that's a little bit different from somebody else that's going to be, you know, trying for these magazines?
Exactly. Yeah. You've got to write something that is very similar to that's gone before, but that is completely new and fresh.
Wow. Just thinking about that, and I'm like,
Well, because when people buy the magazines, they're looking for particular types of story. They don't want a crime story. They don't want a disaster story. They want a particular type of story. But they don't want to read something that they've read before. And it's quite difficult to keep the genre fresh.
I can imagine. And in between times, you've written a book to help people that want to get started, and it's the Writer's ABC Checklist. Now, you did write it in conjunction with Maureen, and I'm just wondering how all that came about as well. I'm thinking it's because you came across quite a lot of difficulties, and it's giving would-be writers all the tools to be able to do it, to make life easier for them.
That's exactly how it came about. When I started to get quite a lot of work published, I realised at that stage that I had a lot of information that I'd found difficult to put together. You know, that I'd had to say, all of the information in here is available all over the internet, but you've got to know where to look for it. You've got to know what you're looking for. There's a quote on here that, you know, there are questions that you don't even know you should ask. The answers are in here. And Maureen, the friend and a writing colleague, and I said to her a few years back now, why don't we put together a book of everything that we know, that we have learned, plus do lots of research and find as much as we can that would be helpful for beginner writers. And that's who it was aimed at originally. But then we found that even quite experienced writers found it useful.
That's good, because you know, it does encourage people, because you might have written something or you're starting to write something, but it's quite daunting trying to get anybody to read it. It's in the business.
It is. When I think of some of the work that I sent off in the early days, I cringe. And I think, oh no, how could I have done that? But all new writers do, because you don't know any better.
Make all the same mistakes. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, useful book there then, very useful. And now then, Vlad the Inhaler, which I think is a fantastic title. When I saw it, I just laughed, because obviously Vlad the Impaler came to mind.
Exactly.
And it is going to be published on the 2nd of April, something that must bring you great joy, because you wrote it so long ago, didn't you?
Yes. That's the book that is closest to my heart. I'm busy writing the second it's a trilogy, and I'm busy writing the second book at the moment. But Vlad...
Tell us about the character, Vlad.
Okay, right. Vlad, his father is a vampire, his mother is human. The father gave up being drinking blood because of the love that he had for this human woman.
Mother, yeah.
And they had Vlad, and poor Vlad, he is what is called a hupire. He's half human, half vampire. But he's a vegetarian. He's scared of the dark. He can't turn into a bat. He's very timid. But he's very happy because he's in a very loving environment. Except the book opens, his parents have disappeared, his evil vampire relatives have swooped in and taken over the castle, and they're keeping Vlad alive basically until they can find the treasure that goes with the castle. Yeah. And Vlad, basically, he has to escape, and he has to find some courage.
Okay. Oh, and obviously, if it's a trilogy, he finds a way.
Well, but he is quite some character. He's lovely.
And I'm presuming that perhaps the age group would be 9, 10?
It's published as 8 to 12, but I would say it's more 9 and upwards. I think 8-year-olds might struggle a bit.
And I'm presuming some humour in it?
Lots of humour. Lots of humour. Dark humour, but lots of humour.
Children like that.
Yes,
they do,
exactly.
You've also got, on the 20, we must remind people now while we're talking about Vlad the Inhaler, you have a book signing on 27th of April, and it's a children's event as well at the Mijas bookshop, the English bookshop.
Yes.
And you're going to do a reading as well, aren't you?
I'm going to read a little bit and also give the children a chance to ask questions. How do you write a book? Where did the character come from? Just some interaction with the children.
Well, that'll be good for them as well. That'll be good. Something for all the family, a little event.
Exactly.
Okay. Besides all of this, you do a critique and author mentoring service. What do you find that you're having to repeat most of the time? What mistakes are people making in general?
It depends whether it's for fiction. People tend to forget that they need a plot.
They get wound up with a description.
But yes, they get wound up in the character, but the character doesn't actually do anything. So, we start off with Mr. Bloggs. Yeah. And we learn all about Mr. Bloggs, what he does, where he goes, what he looks like, what he likes to wear, what he likes to eat, the end. And you think, but Mr. Bloggs didn't do anything, nothing happened. Yes. And the important thing with fiction is that at the end, there has to be some growth or change in the character. The plot has to actually make the character change in some way. And beginner writers tend to forget that you need a plot. Yeah. Or they have really good plots and they forget about the characters. So, it's difficult to marry the two together when you're starting out. Well, to help people along, you have writing workshops, and there's one coming up in March. The last Monday, it starts the last Monday in February. It's a 6-week course, and it's called The Elements of Fiction, and it's basically teaching people how to write fiction. Okay, so you sort of go through all the different elements of it, as you say. Yes. Just looking at it, for example, in week 1, they can discover the essential elements of fiction. Week 2 concentrates on characters. And then, of course, further down, week 5 is the plotting and the structure, as you were saying, and putting it all together. So people can really get to grips with how to do it. There will be 2-hour sessions which will be interactive, and I'll be giving assignments which people will then take home and then send to me by email. I will mark, hand back at the next meeting, which we will then discuss briefly, and then go on to the next element, so that by the end people should feel confident that they can put these elements together and create a work of fiction, whether it's a short story or the plot for a novel. Okay. And where will these workshops take place? At the Brasserie in Casares del Sol. Okay. And Casares Costa.
Right, and if they go onto your website, which is lorrainemace.com, all the details are there.
All the details there.
And we've got it up on the screen again.
Okay.
So that's lovely. Thank you very much, Lorraine. Look forward to chatting with you again later on about the nominations.
Thank you.
And, of course, the book itself as well, and how the book signing went and the event.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
No problem, no problem. Definitely a lady that's got a lot of different talents in the field of writing. Thank you.
Thank you.